A couple months ago, I finally beat Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, a little bit later than everybody else, and it was just a fantastic game. As someone who loves to watch game design videos, I decided to find someone who talked about the things I saw in the game that was extremely interesting and go into more depth about it. I was sadly met with mostly videos talking about the early controversy on how difficult the game was. I feel like someone should make a video about it, so I guess I'll be that guy. Now, as a forewarning, I wouldn't say that I'm the best at discussing these topics either, neither in the lore of the game or in game design, so I'll recommend a few people that I watch. If you love From Software lore and want to know more, Vati Vidya does an excellent job at breaking it down into short videos, and Game Maker's Toolkit or Adam Millard make excellent videos in game design. You should follow them if you're interested in any of the things I'll be discussing in this video. I'll leave a link to their channels in the description. With that out of the way, let's get back on topic and talk about how the fights in Sekiro can tell most of the story. Oh, and of course, spoilers ahead, I highly recommend playing this game, so this is a point of no return. Okay, let's go. I would say the easiest way to break down what From Software does is use a writing technique called show, don't tell. The name explains it all. Instead of blandly telling the reader the various traits of a character, like how strong or weak the character is, you instead show the audience through their actions. Not using show, don't tell can end with you building up a character with dialogue or text, and then they don't end up meeting those expectations. This type of dialogue happens quite often in games, usually in RPGs. I'll level up so much that the last boss that's supposed to be an incredibly powerful being becomes a breeze to go through, and sometimes it ends up being rather disappointing, such as the Final Four in Pokemon games. You have a buildup of dialogue from multiple people throughout the game on how powerful the Final Four and the Pokemon champion are, but you probably ended up blowing through the Final Four and maybe lost once or twice to the Pokemon champion before finally beating them. I know that Pokemon is a little bit of an easy target, but you could say the same with the last boss of Monster Hunter World, and you could probably think of several others yourselves. There are ways of fixing this, but since that could take up enough time to make its own video, let's just talk about how Sekiro uses show don't tell in its fights. Let's analyze every detail of the first enemies you'll encounter as an example, the foot soldiers of the Ashina clan. They tell a part of the story that when you get the full picture, you can look back on them and understand the world a bit better. Let's look at this first guy. Just going off of his looks, what can you figure out about him? Well, he's an older gentleman that is lightly armored and is carrying a single sword. When you get into a fight with him, he'll quickly draw his sword and normally does a large, exaggerated swing at you that can easily be countered. If you get a perfect deflect, then you'll instantly break his posture, and even if he does attempt to block, you can break his posture with just a few swings of your own sword. Just with this, you can learn a lot about this enemy. As an older gentleman, he would be physically weaker, which is why his posture is low. And it seems quite obvious that he doesn't have any idea how to wield a weapon properly, as he swings wildly with one arm. So both his inexperience and his older age makes him physically weaker, thus explaining why his posture is just so low. As we get further into the story, we understand that the Ashina clan is getting ready for war, to defend itself versus the Interior Ministry. Going from the time period, it would be quite common to draft farmers and any able-bodied man to fight. Most likely they didn't have the funding to give the older men good armor, weapons, or training, so they gave them the least they could and would give the younger soldiers better equipment. Which leads us into the second enemy that you'd find, the well-armored foot soldier with a nice hat. These enemies seem to be younger, more well-equipped, and can defend themselves better than the older fellow. It seems they've had some sort of basic training, as they have a controlled two-handed downward swing that they usually use, but even with them, if you get a perfect deflect, you can easily break their posture, showing their inexperience. Overall, it's very basic stuff that most likely you saw and understood on your own playthrough of Sekiro, but it's always the basic stuff that helps lay down the foundation for the rest of any game. Where Sekiro sorts of fails in this regard, in my opinion, is how they don't put much emotion into some of the fights in Sekiro. Let me explain. I wouldn't say this is a minus for them for not having it, but it would have been a bonus to have something like this in the game. The one fight that I could see them easily putting this into would be the fight against Genichiro before you fight against the Sword Saint Ishin. This is the last attempt for Genichiro to personally defeat Sekiro and then fight back against the Interior Ministry. What if instead of just fighting him, where he has the same exact fighting style as when you previously went against him with just the mortal draw added on top, you see him slowly become more aggressive as he loses more of his posture and health versus you, as he becomes more agitated and doesn't want to lose to you once again. What would then put this over the top for me would be if once you get the death blow kill on him, he actually prevents it. A different subversion of the death blow kill than we've previously seen from some of the enemies such as the Guardian Ape. After subverting the death blow, he flings out a long chain of the floating passage, maybe even using a move similar to the spiral cloud technique against you. Just this final act of desperation where he's throwing everything he can versus you to save the Ashina clan would put the final fight against him in a more memorable position for me, and it would show that Genichiro had done everything possible to try and defeat Sekiro himself before turning to use a mortal blade to resurrect his grandfather. Where Sekiro really shines is with their usage of relativity, which I consider to be a branching technique of show don't tell. It's where you relate two characters in some form or fashion. This could be through their looks, the way they talk, the way they dress, or in Sekiro's case, the way they fight. The first time I noticed this relativity amongst characters was in the owl boss fight atop Ashina Castle. You might know where this is going. If you're like me, when you get into these boss fights, I try to poke and prod to see how the bosses react. So when I ended up doing a thrust attack against him, I learned very quickly that I fucked up. And it was such a great moment when you remember that this is the man alongside Lady Butterfly that taught you the exact moves and all the skills in the Shinobi art skill tree. So it isn't a stretch at all to see him use the Mikiri counter versus you. It was overall such a great boss fight where he uses some of the same trickery with Shinobi tools that you've probably been using as well. Also, as a side note, I found this part to be pretty great. When you get to the first death blow on Owl and he slams his head into the ground, if you didn't know, this is actually known as a dogeza. In Japan, it is used when you need to apologize for a major mistake or transgression. There are several levels of dogeza to represent how sorry you are, and he uses the lowest form where you place your head directly onto the floor. Well, slams it into the floor. I think it was just another nice point to show how much he tries to deceive Sekiro. You can find a lot of relativity throughout Ashina Castle, as it becomes a lot more apparent how they all tie together once you've fought Ishin. As Ishin is the head of the Ashina clan and creator of the Ashina fighting style, most of the warriors beneath him take on similar moves to his. For example, you have the blue-robed warriors and how they attack with a straight-down strike similar to the Ichimonji strike. Or you have the mini-boss before Genichiro and his attempt to perfect what looks like the Ishin's Ashina cross. By far though, the absolute best example of this is in the fight with Emma, and this is also where they tell you a lot about her fighting style before the battle as well, a tell before show. While this would normally be bad, let's go over what was told. If you gave her some unrefined sake, you would get into a conversation where you asked her where she learned how to use a blade, in which she would tell you she learned it from Ishin, but only has a passing interest in it. This tells you a bit about her fighting style beforehand, but confirms it within the fight. You will see her use the same 3-strike attack that Ishin uses very often, and using the same tell into a grab as the Shura ending Ishin will do. But there's just a bit more here than just that, although this could be me reading too much into this. She has this attack that has a delay into an unstoppable flurry of blows, that is exceptionally similar to someone else who isn't Ishin. That person is Genichiro, whose teacher is Tomoe and not Ishin. But Genichiro is the adopted grandson of Ishin, so Emma and Genichiro have probably interacted with each other quite a lot. It wouldn't be a surprise to see that Emma created this move after attempting to copy Genichiro or had taken lessons from Lady Tomoe as well. This could just be me overthinking this, but the move is extremely different and more flowing than the moves you normally see from Ishin. Also, if you end up getting a good deflect at the end of this flurry of blows, you can toss Emma off to the side and cause her to stumble, showing how her passing interest in swordsmanship leaves some openings. This consistency in what they told you and then what they showed in the Emma fight felt so good when I was able to connect these points together. While Sekiro does a great job in connecting characters with the way they fight, there are two bosses that break this sort of relativity. Sort of. Those bosses are Lady Butterfly and the Demon of Hatred. Like I stated before, Lady Butterfly is one of Sekiro's mentors, helping him in his training in the shinobi arts alongside Owl. But in the fight, I couldn't see one similarity between hers and Sekiro's fighting style. You could say that she helped in some of our other shinobi arts, such as Seeing in the Dark, but I think it's a shame that we don't see it in the fight, especially when this could have been easily resolved. One of the moves that are kinda similar between you and Owl is a sword strike that closes the distance after a kunai throw. While it isn't exactly a match for match, the results are the same, in which you force the enemy into a defensive position or catch them off guard. This move could have been added to Lady Butterfly's attack options as well. Just at least that one addition could have made a bit of difference. The other instance of them not making any relation between characters is in the fight with the Demon of Hatred, which, if you didn't know, is the sculptor from the beginning of the game. He's the one that helped you after you lost your arm and gave you the shinobi prosthetic, a tool he was adept at but has ceased to find use for. At this point, he's been taken over by Shura and has gone mad. It would have been interesting to see this oversized behemoth transform his left arm into several of the shinobi prosthetics in the middle of the fight, as Shura uses the memories of the sculptor to use them against you, but instead he mostly uses it as a whip, an item that isn't even a prosthetic, or to throw massive fireballs at you. This could have been an interesting moment for those that didn't know it was a sculptor to possibly find out mid-fight that it was them. While these two boss fights don't ruin the game, I mean, they were still pretty fun bosses. I think when you have a game filled with these kind of relations, there are missed opportunities to create even more and have some nice moments of realization for the players when they find them. And I think that mostly explains some of the good points of Show Don't Tell and Sekiro. I could go into more depth about some of the other parts, but I'll save you guys some time and restrain myself just a bit. Adding in these moments of discovery for players is usually a good idea, as it engages them more than just handing the information in huge chunks of dialogue. If you're making a video game with two characters that, let's say, have the same master, give them similar power moves, but make their regular moves more varied, so you see where they branched off and found their own preferences. Or if you have a game filled with fighting yakuza or thugs where the main boss is an extremely good fighter, you can have the henchmen under him try to sloppily recreate their moves. I don't know, but I think there is some missed potential that can be utilized by doing some small things like this. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you like this kind of content, I'd recommend you follow the people I talked about before. I honestly don't know how often I'll make videos like this, but I do have a couple more ideas for them. But if you would like to support me, I'd appreciate it if you join my Twitch channel or my Discord group. Links are also in the description. I have myself a streaming schedule set up, and I'd enjoy talking about games with anybody, anytime. And of course, you could finally recommend me to finish Bloodborne. I still haven't finished it. I probably should. I hope everyone has a fantastic day, and maybe I'll catch you later. See ya. Oh yeah, like and subscribe. I have to say that, don't I? Yeah, I have to say that.